people probably thought I was lucky to have found a creative man at my age instead of becoming one of those women who quietly disappear into routines and orthopedic shoes and solo dinners with a podcast playing in the background. Sometimes I believed that too. Other times I sat in my own kitchen looking at unpaid utility notices hidden under watercolor sketches and felt something ugly growing inside me. Not fear exactly. Something meaner. I met Daniel when I was 41 and still living in Manhattan. He had paint on his hands the first time we kissed. I remember that because afterward I found blue fingerprints on my white blouse, and instead of being annoyed I thought it was romantic. God, that version of me embarrassed me a little now. He was funny in a distracted way, never fully in the room. He'd forget what he was saying halfway through a sentence because he noticed the shape of light on a building or some stranger's unusual coat. Women loved that about him. I did too at first. He made ordinary things feel briefly important. And he worked. That matters. People hear artist and immediately imagine irresponsibility, but he had structure back then. He designed sets for small theater companies, taught part-time, sold pieces occasionally, did installation work. He paid rent. He complained about taxes. He had 3 alarm clocks because he slept through 2. He was an adult. Maybe not conventional, but functional. I need to say that because sometimes I wonder if I rewrote history to make myself feel less stupid. For years we had separate apartments. I liked that arrangement more than I admitted. I liked going home alone after dinner. I liked my quiet mornings. I liked knowing every object in my apartment belonged exactly where I left it. Daniel used to joke that I lived like a Scandinavian widow. I told him that was better than living like a raccoon in human clothing. He laughed so hard he choked on wine. Back then we were still charming each other. I had spent most of my adult life alone, and not in a tragic way. I traveled alone, ate alone, bought property alone. When my mother died, I arranged the funeral alone because my brother vanished emotionally the second things became difficult. Independence became less of a personality trait and more like scar tissue. Useful, thick, hard to soften. Then COVID came and everything became strange and temporary and ugly. I lost my consulting job first. Not permanently, but long enough to panic. I remember sitting on the floor calculating exactly how many months my savings could carry me if things collapsed completely. 8 months comfortably. 11 if I became grim about groceries. Daniel lost almost all his work within weeks. At first we treated it like weather. Temporary. Everyone did. He moved into my place officially because it seemed practical. His studio closed. The city felt haunted. Sirens all night. Empty streets. We cooked elaborate meals and drank too much wine and told each other we'd laugh about it someday. But somewhere in those years something shifted in him and never shifted back. Not all at once. That's the difficult part. People imagine relationships breaking dramatically. Affairs. Screaming matches. Someone standing in the rain with a suitcase. Most endings are slower. More administrative. At first Daniel was energized. New ideas every day. New projects. He talked constantly about reinvention, digital exhibitions, collaborations, grants, big plans. Then months passed. Then years. I went back to work before he stabilized. Then I started earning more than I ever had. Remote consulting became surprisingly profitable for me. Meanwhile, Daniel's projects kept almost happening. That phrase became the soundtrack of our apartment. Almost happened. A gallery almost picked him up. An investor almost funded something. A friend almost connected him with a teaching position. At some point I stopped asking follow-up questions because the answers exhausted me. I know how awful that sounds. He would come into the bedroom excited, hair wild, waving sketches around while I sat there trying to figure out why our credit card balance suddenly jumped $400. Part of me admired him. part of me wanted to scream. And the worst thing is he could sense it. Not directly. Daniel wasn't emotionally perceptive in any sophisticated way. He mostly reacted like a wounded dog. Defensive first, sad later. One night he found me staring at spreadsheets at almost midnight. "You're doing the thing again," he said. "What thing?" "Treating life like a math problem." I laughed because otherwise I would have said something cruel. Life had become a math problem. Someone had to solve it. I started paying for almost everything gradually enough that neither of us acknowledged it clearly. Rent, groceries, insurance, flights when we visited his family, the internet bill, then his phone when he fell behind for a month. There's a specific kind of resentment that makes you ashamed because technically nobody forced you into it. I kept saying yes. That's what I told myself anyway. Sometimes I think I liked feeling needed more than I admit. That's the embarrassing part nobody says out loud. I complained to friends about carrying everything financially, but when Daniel occasionally talked about taking some terrible office job, I felt weirdly panicked. I didn't want him broken either. I wanted him successful enough not to depend on me but artistic enough to stay the man I fell in love with. Convenient fantasy. Around year 5 living together, small things started irritating me in irrational ways. His coffee cups everywhere. His inability to close cabinet doors. The fact he always bought expensive olive oil while we were financially stressed. One afternoon I watched him spend $40 on imported paintbrushes and nearly lost my mind internally. Not externally. Internally. Externally I said, "Those look nice." Then I went into the bathroom and sat on the closed toilet lid feeling furious about paintbrushes like a complete lunatic. I became mean in subtle ways. That's hard to admit. I started mentioning my workload too often. Mentioning costs too specifically. I developed this clipped tone whenever money came up. "Oh, another unpaid invoice? Oh, another project delayed?" I could hear myself sounding like someone's bitter father. He withdrew more each year. That made me angrier. Nothing inflamed me more than his optimism. I know that sounds terrible, but there he'd be making pasta at 2 p.m., humming to himself, talking about some future installation idea while I was calculating retirement savings in my head like an anxious accountant preparing for the apocalypse. Once I snapped at him because he bought fresh flowers. Fresh flowers. He stood there holding them, confused. "I just thought the apartment looked sad," he said, and instead of apologizing I doubled down, started talking about unnecessary spending. He put the flowers in water anyway. Yellow tulips. I hated them for a week. Then they wilted and made me sad. I don't think Daniel ever fully understood what was happening between us. Even now I'm not sure he does. He thought our problem was temporary stress. I thought our problem was that we wanted fundamentally different lives but had hidden that fact from ourselves because the chemistry was good and New York makes dysfunction feel romantic for a while. There were still good moments. That's what complicated everything. We'd walk for hours sometimes. He'd point out tiny details I never noticed. Birds nesting in street signs. A violinist practicing through an open window. Once we got drunk in Lisbon and danced terribly with strangers until 3 in the morning and I thought maybe I was overreacting about everything. Then we came home to overdue bills. Reality ruins a lot of beautiful evenings. My friends started saying careful things around me. "You seem tired. How's Daniel doing these days?" One friend called him "your dependent" as a joke and I laughed too loudly. I hated her for that. I hated myself more because part of me thought it too. There was a winter evening when something inside me shifted permanently, though I didn't admit it immediately. I had come home after a brutal week. Delayed flights. Client disaster. I hadn't slept properly in days. I opened the apartment door and Daniel was sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by sketches and candles because he was working through creative blockage. And I just stared at him. He looked peaceful. That was the problem. I suddenly felt ancient next to him. Heavy, like I had spent years becoming practical while he stayed suspended in some softer version of adulthood. He looked up and smiled. "You're home early." Something cold moved through me then. Not rage exactly. More like absence. That scared me more than anger ever had. After that, I started fantasizing about apartments again. Tiny ones. Quiet ones. Just mine. I'd browse real estate listings secretly while Daniel slept beside me. I told myself it was harmless. I also started traveling alone more often for work and staying extra days. The first night alone in a hotel room started feeling less lonely than coming home. There was one trip to Copenhagen where I ate dinner by myself near the water and felt so calm I nearly cried into my wine. Not because I missed him, because I didn't. That realization sat inside me like a stone. Still, I delayed everything. 7 years is long enough that your lives tangle together strangely. Furniture, habits, shared passwords, shared jokes, his scarves hanging beside my coats, his mother texting me recipes. Leaving starts feeling administrative before emotional. And Daniel wasn't cruel. That would have been easier. He still touched my back gently when passing behind me in the kitchen. Still remembered exactly how I liked my coffee. Still looked at me sometimes like I was the safest thing in his life. I loved him. I think I still do in some crooked, exhausted way. But love became mixed with responsibility until I couldn't separate them anymore. The actual breakup happened badly and stupidly. Not elegant at all. He asked me one night if I seemed distant lately. I said, "I'm tired." He said, "You're always tired now." And something about the self-pity in his voice made me explode after years of restraint. I started talking about money, about pressure, about feeling trapped. Really talking. Too much. Months of buried resentment coming out sideways and ugly. He looked stunned, then angry. "You think you're better than me because you make money. I think I'm exhausted. You knew who I was." That part hit because it was partially true, but I also wanted to scream that he knew who I was too. Independent, careful, someone who spent decades building stability because nobody else ever built it for me. Instead I just said, "I can't do this forever." He stared at me for a long time after that. Then he laughed once, short and bitter. Forever already happened. That line irritated me more than devastated me, which probably says everything. He moved out 3 months later. Not dramatically. Slowly. Boxes. Trips back and forth. Missing socks left behind for weeks. The apartment became quiet again. I thought I'd feel immediate relief. Instead I felt strange. Lighter sometimes. Horribly guilty other times. For months I kept expecting him to text me a breakthrough. Some giant success proving I abandoned him right before things improved. Part of me almost wanted that. It would have made me the villain cleanly. But life stayed ordinary. He still freelances. Still struggles some years. Does well others. I still work too much. I travel alone again. Sometimes I miss him so intensely it catches me off guard in grocery stores. Usually over something stupid. A weird fruit he liked. Cheap red wine. Yellow tulips. And sometimes, if I'm honest, I feel relieved all over again when I pay my bills without worrying about another adult attached to them. Both feelings exist together. I don't resolve them anymore.